He was just serving soup until the Education Secretary visited the school. That day, the humble school cook's extraordinary past was revealed. The cafeteria of Abraham Lincoln High School on Harrison Street in Chicago's South Side woke up the same way it had for the past decade, with Michael already there, moving through the familiar space with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every inch of his domain. At 4:15 a.m., well before the official 4:30 opening time, he would already be there, turning on lights with a soft click that echoed through the empty space, his footsteps making no sound on the worn linoleum floors. He had keys to everything, the main doors, the storage rooms, the walk-in refrigerators, yet he never made a show of this access. The security guards knew him by the pattern of his arrival. First, the lights in the main kitchen would come on. Then the hum of the industrial refrigerators would begin, followed by the metallic clang of pots being arranged on their hooks. By 4:45 a.m., Michael would have already started the first stock of the day, his movements economical and precise, never wasting emotion, never making unnecessary noise. The other kitchen staff would trickle in around 5:30, finding Michael already deep in his work, the air filled with the aroma of slowly simmering bones and fresh herbs. They would greet him with quiet nods, receiving in return a slight upward tilt of his head, the barest hint of a smile behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Nobody questioned why he arrived so early or why he took such care with food that most students would eat without a second thought. They had long accepted that Michael was different, not unfriendly, but separate, existing in his own world of culinary perfection that seemed both admirable and slightly puzzling for a school cafeteria. His station was always immaculate, his knives sharpened to a razor's edge, his cutting boards scrubbed to a pale whiteness that spoke of years of careful maintenance. The younger cook sometimes joked that Michael treated the school cafeteria like a Michelin-starred restaurant, little knowing how close to the truth their gentle teasing actually was. He could have worked at any of Chicago's finest establishments, they thought, yet he chose to remain here in this underfunded South Side school, serving mashed potatoes and chicken tenders to teenagers who would never appreciate the skill required to make even the simplest food perfectly. What they didn't know was that Michael carried with him the ghost of another life, one that had ended in flames and tragedy 18 years earlier. The memories came to him sometimes in the quiet morning hours, the gleaming copper pots of his restaurant kitchen, the respectful hush that would fall when he entered the room, the way his staff would watch his hands as he demonstrated a new technique. Most of all, he remembered Pierre, his brightest apprentice, the young man who had shown more promise than any chef he'd ever trained. Pierre had been working late that night, perfecting a new sauce when the electrical fire started in the aging building. The investigation later showed it had begun in the walls, spreading silently until it was too late. They found Pierre's body near the walk-in refrigerator, his hands still clutching a container of reduced veal stock. After that, Michel Dubois couldn't bear to enter another professional kitchen. The smells, the sounds, even the feel of a chef's knife in his hand became unbearable reminders of what he had lost. He changed his name, moved across the country, and took the first job he could find that was as far removed from fine dining as possible, a school cafeteria worker in a neighborhood where nobody would think to look for a world-renowned chef. For years, he had maintained this careful anonymity, finding solace in the simple rhythm of school meal preparation. The children didn't care about his past. They only cared that the food tasted good. Their honest appreciation, untainted by food criticism or Michelin stars, became his therapy. He learned to take pleasure in the way a first grader's face would light up when tasting his macaroni and cheese, or how a high school athlete would come back for thirds of his meatloaf. These small moments became the currency of his recovery, each one helping to heal the wounds that had driven him into hiding. That Monday morning began like any other, though there was a different energy in the building. Principal Henderson had been buzzing around since dawn, checking and rechecking everything, from the placement of salt shakers to the polish on the stainless steel counters. "The secretary is coming personally," he kept repeating, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This could mean significant funding for our nutrition program. Michael continued his work undisturbed, his focus entirely on the vegetables he was julienning for the day's stir-fry. His knife moved with hypnotic rhythm, each motion precise and economical, the blade flashing in the fluorescent light as it transformed ordinary carrots and celery into perfect, uniform matchsticks. At exactly 11:28 a.m., the double doors of the cafeteria swung open to admit Secretary Rodriguez and his substantial entourage. The secretary moved through the space with practiced ease, shaking hands with students, complimenting the staff, making thoughtful comments about the importance of school nutrition programs. When he reached Michael's station, he paused, his professional smile fading into an expression of genuine curiosity. He watched, transfixed, as Michael's knife continued its dance, the movement so fluid, so inherently right, that it spoke of decades of practice at the highest level. "Excuse me," the secretary said, his voice cutting through the kitchen noises. "That technique. It's unusual." Michael didn't look up. "Just the way I was taught, sir." But Secretary Rodriguez wasn't satisfied. A passionate amateur chef himself, he recognized something extraordinary in the older man's movements. "No," he insisted, stepping closer. "That's not just good technique. That's classical French training. The way you hold the knife, the angle of the cut, the consistency of the pieces. I've only seen that level of precision in a handful of kitchens worldwide." The atmosphere in the cafeteria changed instantly. The background chatter died away as everyone turned to watch the exchange. Michael slowly set down his knife, the metal clicking softly against the cutting board. He removed his glasses and cleaned them methodically, buying time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I trained in France." "A long time ago?" The secretary's eyes narrowed slightly. "With whom?" The question hung in the air between them. Michael could feel the weight of every eye in the room upon him. He could continue the lie, could give some vague answer that would satisfy the secretary's curiosity without revealing too much. But something in the man's earnest expression, his genuine appreciation for the craft, made the words come tumbling out. "Bocuse, Robuchon, Ducasse. I worked with them all before opening my own place in New York." A visible shudder went through the secretary's body. His face paled noticeably. "My God," he breathed. "You can't be Michel Dubois?" The name hung in the air like smoke, triggering gasps from several of the teachers who recognized it. Michel, no longer Michael, nodded slowly, the movement costing him visible effort. "I was," he said softly, "once." What followed was a moment of profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of traffic from Harrison Street. Then Secretary Rodriguez did something unexpected. He reached out and took Michel's hand in both of his, not in a formal handshake, but in a gesture of deep respect. "Chef Dubois," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the culinary world has been searching for you for nearly 2 decades. After the fire at Le Ciel, when you disappeared, there were so many rumors." Michel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Pierre died in that fire. My brightest student. I couldn't continue after that." The secretary nodded understandingly. "We thought you might have—" "Well, we didn't know what to think. Your disappearance was so complete." At that moment, Secretary Rodriguez turned to address the now silent cafeteria. His voice, when he spoke, carried to every corner of the large room. "Students, teachers, staff, we are in the presence of greatness today. This man," he said, placing a hand on Michel's shoulder, "is Michel Dubois. For those who don't know that name, he was one of the most celebrated chefs of his generation. His restaurant, Le Ciel, received 3 Michelin stars, an honor few chefs ever achieve. And he has been here, serving you, teaching you about good food through his actions without seeking recognition or reward." The effect was electric. Smartphones emerged as students began searching the name, their eyes widening as they discovered the truth. Teachers who had eaten Michel's food for years without a second thought now looked at him with new respect. The kitchen staff, particularly those who had worked alongside him daily, seemed both stunned and oddly proud. In the days that followed, the story exploded far beyond the school's walls. News vans from every major network lined Harrison Street. Food bloggers, culinary journalists, and former colleagues all sought interviews. But Michel, true to his nature, declined them all. He had never sought fame, and he wouldn't start now. The most meaningful visit came the next day, when a familiar figure appeared in the cafeteria doorway. Anthony Rossi, now himself a celebrated chef with 2 Michelin stars to his name, stood trembling slightly as he took in the sight of his former mentor wearing a school cafeteria apron. "Chef," he said, the single word carrying years of respect and affection. Michel looked up from the potatoes he was peeling, and for the first time in 18 years, a genuine, unguarded smile spread across his face.
"Anthony,
"You found me." The younger chef crossed the room in 3 long strides and embraced his mentor fiercely.
all these years," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion.
"We never stopped looking." What followed was hours of conversation as the 2 men caught up on nearly 2 decades of life. Anthony explained how he had taken over Michel's techniques and philosophy, building his own successful restaurant, while always crediting Michel as his inspiration. He made a heartfelt plea for Michel to return to the culinary world, to share his knowledge with a new generation of chefs. At first, Michel refused. The pain was still too fresh, the memories too painful. But Anthony persisted, joined by other former students who had heard the news and come to pay their respects. They didn't want Michel to return to the stress of restaurant life, they explained. They wanted to create something new, a foundation in his name dedicated to improving school nutrition programs across America. Slowly, reluctantly, Michel began to soften. He saw in their faces not pity, but genuine respect and a desire to continue his legacy. He agreed, but on one condition. He would remain, first and foremost, the cook at Abraham Lincoln High School. His work here with these students was non-negotiable. The Dubois Foundation became reality within months. Funded by Michel's former students and colleagues, it provided grants to schools seeking to improve their meal program, scholarships to aspiring chefs from underprivileged backgrounds, and perhaps most importantly, a series of workshops where Michel himself would teach cafeteria workers the techniques he had developed for creating nutritious, delicious meals on a tight budget. Michel also began offering weekly cooking classes to Lincoln High students. These weren't ordinary home economics lessons. They were masterclasses in understanding food, taught by one of the greatest chefs of his generation. Students learned not just how to cook, but how to appreciate ingredients, understand flavors, and respect the cultural significance of food. The changes at Lincoln High were profound. The cafeteria, once just a place to grab a quick meal, became the heart of the school. Students lingered over lunches, discussing the flavors and techniques they were learning. Food waste decreased dramatically as students developed appreciation for the carefully prepared meals. Academic performance even improved as proper nutrition fueled better concentration and learning. Through it all, Michel remained essentially unchanged. He still arrived at 4:15 every morning, still maintained his exacting standards, still preferred to let his cooking speak for him. The main difference was that now he smiled more often. The weight of his secret finally lifted from his shoulders. He had discovered that his tragedy didn't have to define him, that he could honor Pierre's memory not by hiding from the culinary world, but by sharing his knowledge with those who would appreciate it most. The story of Michel Dubois serves as a powerful reminder that greatness often hides in plain sight, that passion doesn't require applause, and that sometimes the most meaningful legacies are built not in fancy restaurants, but in the humble spaces where people need nourishment most. His journey from 3-Michelin-star fame to school cafeteria cook and back again, on his own terms, inspires us to look beyond surfaces, to appreciate the hidden stories around us, and to understand that true mastery isn't about recognition, but about doing something with love and excellence, no matter the setting. So the next time you encounter someone who seems ordinary, take a closer look. You might be in the presence of someone extraordinary who has chosen humility over fame, and if this story has reminded you that greatness wears many disguises, we invite you to subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the remarkable stories hidden in everyday places.